Let's go ahead and begin. Welcome everybody, both here in person and joining us via Zoom with the Aquinas Institute again this evening. My name is Marcus Gibson. I'm delighted to be the director for the Princeton Initiative in Catholic Thought, the intellectual life arm of the Aquinas Institute, dedicated to the mission of offering intellectual programming events, courses dedicated to the pursuit of Catholic thought here in the Princeton community. And I'm very happy to be with all of you tonight here at the end of our fall semester, here in the middle of our first full academic year back in person on campus, able to see each other face to face, which I thought would make a great opportunity to reflect together, especially now as the holidays are approaching, on two interconnected themes. I'm going to share with you tonight, reflect with you on the pursuit of friendship and the pursuit of truth. And I'd like to make the case to you tonight, with the help of Aristotle and Augustine, that these two things, friendship and truth, are best pursued together. So in brief, a deep friendship is one in which friends spend time together, share in activities that are dear to them, and care for each other because of who they are. But who they are is inseparable from their conception of themselves and of their place in the world. And the truth about those highest questions is best pursued in free-flowing, trusting conversation over the long course of time. Conversation which unfolds best precisely in deep friendship. So I'm going to begin with you tonight with a passage from Augustine's Confessions, which I like to share with students at the start of the freshman seminar I teach. This is in the fourth book of the Confessions, Augustine's great prayer of praise, contrition, and thanksgiving, where Augustine finds himself bringing before God a memory of friendship. Augustine's reminiscing on the friendships of his youth and the place that those early friendships held in his heart, even before he came to make the Christian faith his own. What captivated me in my friends, Augustine writes, were things like this: talking together, laughing together, gladly serving each other, reading sweetly phrased books together, sharing in conversations both trivial and earnest, disagreeing from time to time, without anger, as a man might debate with himself, with our rare disagreements making our usual agreement all the sweeter, teaching each other or learning from each other, missing those who are absent, and greeting with joy those who return. These and others like them are the signs given by the mouth, the tongue, the eyes, and 1,000 tender gestures from the hearts of those who love and who return love, the signs that enkindle souls and make of many one. Now, I like to share this moment from Augustine's Confessions with my students because it gives flesh and bones to a form of intellectual life that those in Augustine's time could take for granted, but which in ours proves harder to come by. I mean a form of life in which ordinary friendship and conversation become the place where we, together, seek some share in wisdom as an ordinary human good. There's been a lot of renewed public conversation recently about the nature and purpose of higher education, the liberal arts, and their place in a good human life. And we've seen defenses of the ideal of intellectual life as a human good and new proposals about what institutional forms can best foster that life under present conditions. But even as those conversations continue to unfold, we can take a fresh look at the form of life that Augustine beckons us toward in this passage, to consider the steps here and now that we can take in the field of action that our ordinary life offers us. In the image that Augustine provides us in the passage I just shared with you, the stuff of friendship and of intellectual life form a seamless whole. Augustine and his friends teach one another, but they also joke and laugh together. They read for pleasure together, but they also debate and disagree with each other, even if they're joined by a shared outlook on most things. Augustine is giving us here a snapshot. It's a snapshot of what I'm going to be calling deep friendship, a form of friendship in which one's friend's care for another reaches to the depths of the friend's own commitments and vision of life. A form of friendship which for that reason is inseparable from a shared exploration of life's deepest questions. We could also call deep friendship philosophical friendship, hearkening back to the root of that term, the love of wisdom, or even the longing for wisdom. So when I use that term tonight, the term philosophical, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about something that's confined to specialized expertise or to one academic discipline. I'm not talking about something that belongs only to full-time specialists or to scholars. I'm talking instead about something that each of us is already immersed in, just by being in the business of living a human life. By philosophy, I'm going to be referring to the lifelong pursuit of a mature, articulate understanding of ourselves and our place in the world. An understanding by which we can give guidance to ourselves and to each other, as we seek to conduct ourselves well. So it's that in that expansive sense, which stays close to the business of leading a human life, that what Augustine describes can be called philosophical friendship. This is friendship rooted in deep concern for each other, for how the friend sees life, and therefore with pursuing a clearer and deeper vision of life. What I'd like to make the case to you now, then, is that the kind of philosophical friendship, or deep friendship, that kind of friendship brings out the best in both philosophy and friendship. Or, as I said a moment ago, friendship and truth are best pursued together. So to begin, let's turn now to the first of these two great practitioners and theorists of deep friendship. Let's turn to Aristotle. So in his ethical writings, which are famous for devoting 2 books to the topic of friendship, that's roughly a fifth of the renowned Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle draws our attention to 3 notes or marks of friendship. First, friendship takes mutual goodwill, it takes shared activity, and it takes shared time. So first, friendship takes mutual goodwill. A friendship involves willing good things to each other, getting involved in each other's good. I can't just nurture friendly feelings from you from afar without action if I'm going to call you my friend. Aristotle draws a contrast with the example of an audience rooting for their favorite team or their favorite contestants. You can wish for victory for your favorite runner or your favorite wrestler, but that doesn't make you friends. And so this active involvement in each other's good, this goodwill that makes itself felt in action, has to be mutual and recognized as mutual. If we do each other favors in secret, we may be each other's anonymous benefactors, but that would be a very strange arrangement to call a friendship. Most naturally, then, this recognized mutual goodwill plays itself out in activities that we knowingly and willingly share in together. This brings in why Aristotle thinks that deep friendship requires shared space and time to develop, but we'll return to that later. Now, if we share in this mutual goodwill, then this already rules out a merely instrumental way of relating to each other. Whatever goods we share in together, we will them to each other for each other's sake, as your good, not, for instance, just as a way of advancing my business interests. But even if we do share in goods and activities for each other's sake, Aristotle thinks that there's a plurality of ways of doing so. Our shared activities, the things we do together, the grounds on which we care for each other, may come down to reasons of pleasure, or reasons of utility, or finally reasons of virtue or of goodness as such. So, for instance, we may become friends by spending plenty of time together playing cards or pool or tennis or whatever your favorite hobby is, and that would make ours a friendship of pleasure. Or by working together on the same academic or business projects, that would make us have a friendship of utility. And it's important to note with Aristotle that there's nothing wrong with these friendships of pleasure or utility as such. They do involve genuine care or goodwill. At their best, these kinds of friends will recognize the genuine good in a hobby or in pursuing a business venture together. And they see the right place for that in their lives. They accord it that place. We can love spending time together because we love running together or because we love getting the job done together. And we can still will the good in that shared activity to each other for each other's sake. It's only that our friendship or our mutual goodwill, our common life, will then be confined to this one sphere of action and will only go as deep as it goes and endure as long as it endures. If friends only bond over a shared hobby or a business venture, they'll never get to engage each other on the level of their highest aspirations or business venture, or their highest aspirations or deepest commitments. And if their taste in hobbies change, or if the business venture goes belly up, then there's a real possibility that that friendship will fizzle out. This helps bring into view what's distinctive about friendship based on virtue or goodness for Aristotle, the form that Aristotle singles out as what he calls complete friendship or perfect friendship. It's only in this third and fullest form of friendship that the ground of the friendship becomes virtue, the excellence of mind and heart by which we seek to live. Here, the genuine goodwill that in other cases is confined to one aspect of your life and to one limited good expands to encompass the whole of your life and your whole conception of the good. The activity that most of all makes life worthwhile, the character that equips you to pursue that activity, that becomes the basis and the aim of your shared life. Now here's how Aristotle himself puts it. Whatever someone regards as his being, or the end for which he chooses to be alive, that is the activity that he wishes to pursue in his friend's company. Hence, some friends drink together, others play dice, while others do gymnastics or go hunting, or do philosophy. They spend their days together on whichever pursuit in life they like most. For since they want to live with their friends, they share the actions in which they find their common life. Hence the friendship of base people turns out to be vicious, but the friendship of decent people is decent and increases the more often that they meet. And they seem to become still better from their activities and their mutual corrections. For each molds the other in what they approve of so that you will learn what is noble from noble people. This brings us now to the last of the three elements that I mentioned above. Friendship takes mutual goodwill, it takes shared activity, and it takes shared time. I can't love you for your character, for who you are, unless I know you. And for me to know you, you have to show me who you are, which means, for Aristotle, showing me what your life aims at, what your heart is set on. All of this takes time, even when everyone has the best intentions. The wish for friendship may come quickly, but friendship itself doesn't. Even for people who recognize in each other a settled desire to share in this deep form of friendship, Aristotle tells us that they need time as well. They need time to grow accustomed to each other, for, as the proverb says, they cannot know each other before they have shared their salt, as often as it says. and they cannot accept each other or to be friends until each appears lovable to the other and gains each other's confidence. So the reference there is to an ancient Greek proverb, and roughly to paraphrase, the idea is that you can't call each other friends until you've shared your sack of salt at the dinner table. You've had dinner so many times that you've eaten a sack of salt together. And no, you can't take a shortcut by dumping the whole salt shaker out at once. So it takes many a shared hour to develop the trust and experience needed for the mutual self-disclosure of a deep friendship. But there's another reason deep friendship takes time to take root as well. So far I've been talking as if the parties to a deep friendship already have their fully settled characters. They just have to put in the time to reveal themselves to each other, to reveal the character that they already have and that the aims that they're already pursuing. But it doesn't always go like this. Often we aren't entering into a new friendship with a fully finished state of character or with a worked out and detailed conception of our lives. Even later in life, when our character and our outlook are more settled, friends still have a way of rubbing off on each other. New opportunities, new temptations, and new arenas of action present themselves day after day, and with them come new questions, or old questions brought forward in a new way. It's here, in the shared confrontation with the questions that life throws at us, that the interdependence of deep friendship and philosophy or deep conversation readily appears. We don't just share a ready-made life with our friends. We discover and even receive ourselves through our friends as much as we give of ourselves to them. We get an illustration of this last point on the relationship between conversation and self-knowledge in one of my favorite images to come down to us from Greek philosophy. This comes from the Platonic Dialogue, the first Alcibiades, where Plato has Socrates describe growth in self-knowledge on the model of two people turned to face one another, looking to one another in the eyes. It's precisely by looking into the eyes of another person, Socrates tells us, that you can see your own likeness reflected back at you. Socrates leverages that idea in defense of a particular vision of how to exercise reason in pursuit of the truth. It's not in isolation from the world and from one another that reason finds its fullest expression. We don't come to wisdom or self-knowledge by navel-gazing, but by coming face to face, by having the courage to hold each other's gaze and to speak to one another on the topics and questions that go to the heart of our lives. It's here, in the give and take of serious, searching conversation, that we stand the best chance of coming to a mature understanding of ourselves, our place in the world, and the aims worthy of giving shape to our life and character. And it's by joining in the common pursuit of those central truths that we're able to form the deepest friendships. This, or something like it, lies behind Aristotle's conviction that complete friendship is a friendship of virtue, which is to say a philosophical friendship in the sense that I've been using that phrase. A friendship rooted in a shared love and desire to understand. One of the finest illustrations of that kind of friendship to come down to us from antiquity comes roughly 700 years after Aristotle in the writings of St. Gregory of Nazianzus. St. Gregory, one of the greatest orators and theologians from the patristic period, is remembered not only for his sermons and for his contributions to Trinitarian theology, but also for the deep friendship that he shared with his fellow saint and doctor of the church, St. Basil of Caesarea. So I want you to listen now to the words that St. Gregory composed in a funeral oration on the occasion of Basil's passing. He's looking back to what you can think of as their college days and the early days of their friendship. So here's Gregory. Basil and I were both in Athens. We had come like streams of a river from the same source in our native land, had separated from each other in pursuit of learning, and were now united again, as if by plan. for God so arranged it. Such was the prelude to our friendship, the kindling of that flame that was to bind us together. In this way we began to feel affection for each other. When in the course of time we acknowledged our friendship and recognized that our ambition was a life of true wisdom, we became everything to each other. We shared the same lodging, the same table, the same desires, the same goal. Our love for each other grew daily warmer and deeper. The same hope inspired us, the pursuit of learning. This is an ambition especially subject to envy, yet between us there was no envy. On the contrary, we made capital out of our rivalry. Our rivalry consisted not in seeking the first place for oneself, but in yielding it to the other. For we each looked on the other's success as his own. We seemed to be two bodies with one spirit. Though we cannot believe those who claim that everything is contained in everything, yet you must believe that in our case, each of us was in the other and with the other. I want you to notice that it was precisely a common desire for wisdom that opened Gregory and Basil up to each other, that in Gregory's words made them become everything to each other and enabled them to share in a deep common life. Their example suggests that the pursuit of truth, more than any other shared aim, makes us most fully available to deep friendship with each other. Okay. I now want us to consider the issue from the other direction. So we've been reflecting together with Aristotle on the place that the shared love of truth has in friendship. Now I want us with Augustine to reflect on friendship as a place where the pursuit of truth can flourish most deeply. Augustine sheds some light on this in a surprising place in one of his most influential works, On Christian Teaching, a kind of manual for preaching and for biblical study. And you might be surprised to hear me saying that a place to learn about friendship is a manual for preaching, but it's true, most of us aren't homilists and probably won't be preaching like Augustine anytime soon. But we do find ourselves in a position to make good use of our words in the three ways that Augustine attributes to the art of rhetoric. That's to instruct, to persuade, and to delight. We may not be orators, we may not be preachers, but we do inform and illumine each other. We encourage and help steer each other in pursuit of the good. And we bring joy, ease, and comfort to each other amid life's ordinary toils. Okay, so, on Christian teaching. In the text, Augustine treats as fundamental the first of the three functions of good speech that I mentioned. I'm talking about instruction, the communication of the truth. And in describing the rationale for the work, in its opening sentences, Augustine gives a characteristically elegant expression to a truth that governs good friendship as much as it governs good preaching. So here now is Augustine. Let's think carefully on this next phrase. Every kind of thing, you see, which does not decrease when it is given away, is not yet possessed as it ought to be, while it is held on to, without also being given out to others. So let me say that again. Every kind of thing which does not decrease when it is given away is not yet possessed as it ought to be, while it is held on to, without also being given out to others. So in other words, there are some goods that you only come into full possession of precisely in the measure that you pass it on with open hands. Augustine has in mind a class of goods which, as he sees it, don't diminish when they're shared. Peace is like this, Augustine thinks, and so is joy, and most importantly, for present purposes, so is truth. It's like in the parable of the prodigal son. If we close our hands around these goods, the way the prodigal grasps for his father's property, then we find that the good we thought we had withers in our hands. You can think of this as Augustine's give it or lose it principle governing spiritual goods. So one more time. Every kind of thing which does not decrease when it is given away is not yet possessed as it ought to be while it is held on to, without also being given on to others. Now, we might be tempted to pass over that idea quickly as a piece of moralizing rhetoric, but we'd thereby be cheating ourselves out of a valuable insight about the link between growth and grasp of the truth and growth in love or friendship. We're familiar with the idea that the best way to learn a subject is to teach it, and that it's the mark of a truly expert teacher to be able to communicate a difficult subject to beginners. When that happens, the truth is spread from mind to mind, and we share more widely in the good, without the teacher's share diminishing. If anything, your grasp of the truth deepens as you become more capable of diffusing it. And we can make the point in Aristotelian terms, too. Teaching, or learning, is a change. And like any change, it's an interaction. It's the mutual activation of active and passive powers, or active and receptive powers. Knowledge, then, is most fully present in the soul of the knower, precisely when it's imparted to another. Even if we aren't preachers, then, we can apply Augustine's lesson to our own case. If we want to grow in our search for the truths that are worth living by, we'll want the help and conversation of friends with whom we can share our questions and insights. And one of the best acts of love that we can offer our friends in turn is to encourage them to seek those questions, seek the answers that those questions point to stand ready to offer whatever help it's in our hands to provide. After all, this is one of Augustine's favorite ways of describing happiness, to find joy in the truth, gaudium de veritate. There's a peace and a joy that comes from knowing yourself and your direction in life, from knowing the still point around which your world turns. And Augustine would be quick to remind us that that's no accident. We find joy in the truth because we are made for the truth that is the triune God. When we make the truth and desire to understand the truth, the common bond of our friendship, we act in accord with what we are. And this is why Augustine would assure us that God and truth can never be threats or rivals to human love and friendship. When later on in On Christian Teaching, Augustine claims that we should only ever love God with what he calls the love of enjoyment, and love creatures only with the love of use, Augustine has sometimes been misunderstood as meaning that our love for each other should be somehow instrumental to our love of God. But that misconstrues, I think, what Augustine means by love of enjoyment and love of use. What Augustine is saying there goes hand in hand with the claim that we are, each of us, images of God. In the language of Augustine's treatise, we are both res, a reality, and signum, a sign of our Creator. Far from the love of God instrumentalizing my love of friends, then, I can only begin to love my friends for who they are as I come to recognize them as pointing beyond themselves to the one in whose image they are made. There's a maxim attributed to Aristotle, paraphrasing his famous disagreement with his teacher Plato, and it goes like this: Plato is a friend, but truth a greater friend. With Augustine in mind, we could then add that Plato and you and me can be a friend only because truth is a friend first. To conclude then, let's take a step back. I've tried to make vivid to you tonight the vision of deep friendship that we find on display in different ways in both Aristotle and Augustine. In light of their overlapping understandings of friendship, I've made the case to you that friendship and truth are best pursued together. I want to close by connecting this vision of friendship, finally, with the virtue of charity. In a homily for the feast of St. John the Apostle, John Henry Newman gives us a vivid depiction of charity as divine friendship, spread first from Christ to his apostles, from the apostles to the whole church, and from the church to each of us. Now here's Newman. It might be supposed, Newman writes, that the Son of God Most High could not have loved one man more than another. Or again, if so, that he would not have had only one friend, but as being all holy, he would have loved all men more or less in proportion to their holiness. Yet we find our Savior had a private friend. And this shows us first how entirely he was a man, as much as any of us, in his wants and feelings. And next, that there is nothing contrary to the spirit of the gospel, nothing inconsistent with the fullness of Christian love, in having our affections directed in an especial way towards certain objects, towards those whom the circumstances of our past life or some peculiarities of character have endeared to us. By trying to love our relations and friends, by submitting to their wishes, though contrary to our own, by bearing with their infirmities, by overcoming their occasional waywardness by kindness, by dwelling on their excellences and trying to copy them. Thus it is that we form in our hearts that root of charity, which, though small at first, may, like the mustard seed, at last even overshadow the earth. Thank you for your attention. Well, we have some time now for question and answers. I'm happy to take questions both from here in the room and from our listeners over Zoom. There we go. Marta.
Thank you. Is it on? Yeah. Thank you for your talk, Dr. Gibson.
Thanks, Marta.
It's great to hear. I thought the point about the rivalry was very interesting, but my question is about something else where you were talking about St. Gregory commenting on his friendship with St. Basil, and him saying 2 bodies in 1 spirit. I thought that resembled the understanding of marriage. Could you comment on differences and similarities between the type of relationship?
Sure. Thank you so much, Marta, for that penetrating question. I guess with that language of sort of dwelling in each other or being of one spirit, I always go back to the discourse in the Gospel of John where Jesus talks about us dwelling in him and he in us, that idea of mutual indwelling as being this mark of charity, of love, human love that's elevated by grace. And so if that's true, then wherever you see charity lived out, wherever you see that kind of divine friendship, that friendship that we share in by way of Christ, then you'll find this kind of dwelling of one in the other, even if it's an ordinary human friendship in every other respect. So think of that as sort of a mind-to-mind or heart-to-heart mutual indwelling. That'll be different, of course, from a marriage which has those marks of friendship too, ideally. There's that sharing of heart and heart and of mind and mind, but it's more comprehensive, of course. It includes not just this union or mutual indwelling at the level of the heart or the mind, but at the level of the body as well. Thank you, Marta. Yeah. Other questions?
Thank you, Marcus, for this wonderful talk.
Thank you, Minche.
I'm wondering about how truth can both foster and serve as a foundation for many friendships, but I'm also struck by how, both in my own case and in the cases I've seen around me, that both 2 people beginning pursuing the same truth, but then at some point in the way, because of the way they view the truth, the friendship splinters and so on. Does St. Augustine or St. Gregory do they have something to say about that? What do they think is the remedy for that other than exhortations to charity? Because sometimes charity does not seem like enough to hold that together.
Yeah. The first thought I'm having in response to that question, which is so important for all of us as we strive to extend friendship to even those that we don't share a lot in common with. My mind goes first, actually, not to Augustine, but to Aristotle, right? Which in a way is maybe what you'd want, because you think Aristotle is testifying, of course, not to grace or revelation, but to our common nature, our common humanity. And maybe that's the place where I'd look. I mean, Aristotle, even though he thinks that the best friendship is that deepest friendship that looks to a shared view of the truth, shared grasp of the truth, he makes room for these other kinds of friendships too, grounded in pleasure or utility, which are good even if they're less complete. And what I think that points us to is this idea that even for those with whom we don't share a common vision of the truth, we're still fellow human beings, and so there's still room there in our common humanity, in our interests, in our hobbies, in our common business pursuits, whatever the case may be, however life throws us together. There's room there, there's potential there, to keep a friendship alive and to express a genuine regard, a genuine care for the other person, even if they can't see that care for them on display when you try to share the truth with them. Think of that as being sort of the Aristotelian contribution, and then the other contribution would be always on the side of grace, always to come to that friendship and to keep that friendship in prayer. Even if you can't pray for the other person, my sort of more practical thought is that when you make the effort to reach out to them, you keep that friendship couched in prayer, sandwiched in prayer. That's the thought. Yeah. Thanks, Mintae.
I have a question for you from one of our Zoom attendees.
Great. Thank you.
It's from Sarah Genster Roebling, who asks, expanding on the question relative to marriage, can you comment on the support and expansion marriage and friendship provide each other?
Yes. Well, one thing that's very interesting about the way Aristotle thinks about these things, and thank you so much for that great question. I find myself thinking about this in a really practical way quite a lot lately since I just got married in August, actually. What I'm struck by is, Aristotle thinks that shared time and shared place are really important for the deepest kind of friendship. He actually thinks that the deepest kinds of friends more or less live together in a very thick sense. Even if they're not under the same roof, they share a common life, they share a common place in which they share their lives. And so, you can easily see the connection with marriage and family there is the maintaining of a common home already creates the room for all of these occasions for shared activity and to really seek out each other's highest good, to seek out each other's goods in the ordinary details of life. That's the first thought that comes in connection with marriage as a kind of friendship and the opportunities that marriage provides for really fostering this deep kind of friendship. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Just building on the earlier question about friendships with those who don't share our beliefs. I think that's an important topic to do because, so often, most of the people that we deal with don't share our beliefs. And so I think it's just interesting to reflect on the value of those friendships, even if they're not a friendship in the fullest sense that Aristotle speaks about. And in your response to that question, you were talking about shared humanity, and so often we see that that's lacking. And we live here in a university, but it can be easy either in this university or in our society in general just to kind of get caught up in our sort of own group of people and maybe not talk with other people. People often talk about in our society, people are sort of maybe talking past each other and not engaging in conversation with one another. So I'm just wondering if you maybe could talk a little bit more about how one, maybe a theoretical, but also maybe a practical level, how can one sort of develop that capacity to develop friendships, even if it's just maybe a friendship of utility or a sort of basic level or a basic truth, but then eventually to kind of knowing that that can be a way of leading people to a greater truth.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I always think it gets risky when it's the philosophy instructor's turn to give practical advice, but I'll do my best for sure. How to foster that friendship with people where there's profound disagreement. As you hinted, there's always the room in sort of the pursuits that we find ourselves having in common, the goods that we recognize in common in a kind of daily, everyday way. So I think here on campus, if you're classmates or if you're part of the same club, there's room there to take the initiative to give recognizable expressions of care, of regard for the other person, of affection for them, in terms that they'll understand. So thinking of it almost as an act of communication or of translation even, to find sort of what they would recognize as care in terms of those goods that you both recognize in common. Whether it's the club's end of semester project or if it's studying together in the classroom, that kind of thing. And together with that, there's the point Aristotle makes that it takes shared time. Above all, I guess, if there's not a lot of common ground in terms of the deepest things, it can take time. And so on our part, for those of us who want to take the initiative, it can take a lot of insistence over time to make that genuine desire for friendship felt. So to put in the time, I suppose, is another important practical point. And then finally, again, even if sort of truths of the Catholic faith aren't shared in those kinds of friendships, there are deep resources in the Catholic faith that I think it's worth meditating on for taking that initiative. So thinking about the life of Jesus himself as this effort to take the initiative and extend that friendship, even where that friendship or that relationship had been rebuffed, even where that relationship had been rejected in the most uncertain terms. That's something worth reflecting on. And then, again, as I say, I think it's a helpful thing to pray for the person that you want to befriend, even when there's not a lot of common ground there. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for your speech, Dr. Gibson.
Thank you.
So I am a very curious person. I am curious about things, about people, and I think because of that, I've found it difficult to really develop deep friendships because I talk to so many different people, and I think it becomes difficult to have that shared activity, shared time with everyone that's sufficient enough to develop those deep friendships. So I was interested in the example of Gregory and Basil that you gave, and you mentioned that they had very similar interests, and I was wondering if that would somehow restrict growth of either party, if they have they're not being exposed to something else other than the interests they share.
Yeah.
And also if whether having few or several friends would have an influence on the number of deep friendships you can form.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, those are great questions. They link up very well with some of Aristotle's own observations. So you're kind of thinking along with him there. Aristotle does say, because it takes all of this shared time and shared activity, that he thinks those very deepest kinds of friendship will, in most cases, be few. You might only have a handful at most of these deepest friends with whom you share so much of your life. And that even that is a great thing, something to be profoundly grateful for. But I think we can imagine that situation kind of along a spectrum. You have the handful of closest friends that you want to make the effort to maintain or to make. And then moving outward from that, kind of in concentric circles, you have those friends with maybe you have less in common with, or maybe life keeps you from being able to share as much of your time with, but who you still regard as your friends, and you still keep in touch and stay close to each other as far as you can. I like a lot the part of your question about shared interest and making sure that that's not too confining or too limiting. I think part of this whole picture that I was exploring with you today indicates that it is a deeply important thing to have those friends with whom you can really share a full vision of life with together, and that you can really pursue the truth in common with. But of course that's not going to be every friendship. And so one of the good things about making friends widely is to be able to share parts of ourselves that the other person, that enables the person to pick up on truths or goods that they wouldn't be able to pick up on their own. And so maybe there's a balance there to seek, to make an effort to, on the one hand, have the tighter circle that you can really kind of bear more of your heart with, because you know that they share a kind of common vision with you. And then those other friends who maybe share different interests with you. Maybe you're more of an art person and they're more of a math person or a STEM person, with whom you can open up each other's worlds in different ways, or with whom you can share parts of the world that they wouldn't be able to encounter without you. Thank you.
Thank you for the lecture. So my question is about, well, I guess the nature of friendship itself. So you mentioned there are these two principles in the last half of the lecture, where you have material goods that when you give them away, you have less of them. Mm-hmm. And then you have these kind of common or immaterial goods that, in fact, you come to possess more fully when you share them with other people. And it seems that these two principles taken together kind of doom friendship to failure in a way, because the other person is, kind of both material and immaterial. I think we've all experienced situations where we spend time with another person, mm-hmm. and then there's maybe a third person in the conversation, and all of a sudden they start bringing things out of our friend that we would have never known about, and it's delightful. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if your friend is always spending time with other people, then you don't have much of a friendship. So do you have advice or thoughts on how to kind of approach the mean here? Or is it just kind of a tragic feature of the human condition that we can never really fully know our friends as much as we'd like to?
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. It's a terrific question. Something to keep thinking about even after the lecture, I think. So I'm inclined to agree with Aristotle when he says that if we're really going for this full picture of friendship, that's something that you can only really share with a smaller number of people. You can't share your life to that extent with, say, whole crowds or villages, at least if we're talking about you and me, right, Daniel? So to that extent, sharing in that friendship, that's something that you're going to have kind of a small pool of people with whom to share. But sort of growing in the friendship is something that expands as you share it, right? So along that dimension, the intimacy, the degree of intimacy, is something that doesn't get diminished as you share it with that handful of people. I think that's the way to kind of bring the two thoughts together there. And what that makes possible then in the case of the small circle of friends, so think of the passage I started with from Augustine, where clearly that's like a circle of friends. You can think of other friends of his who, like him, went on to convert or to fully embrace the Christian faith and take positions of leadership in the church, people like his friend Alypius. They, like you said, bring out different sides of each other, and so help to reveal each friend to the others in the group. That's something that, again, it takes a small number of people to really make it happen together, but it enables that growth and intimacy to continue growing, and it seems to me, approaching infinity. It's not something that's really limited in the way that, say, the number of people with whom you can share the relationship is limited. Hope that helps. Yeah. Thanks, Daniel.
I have another question that is more about an outside topic of like ascetic life. So I was wondering, like, would Aristotle say that absence of like human friends hinders one search for truth? Would he say that it's in our nature to have human friendships? And if so, how would then that affect ascetic life? And
yeah. Excellent. Yeah, great question, Marta. So, yeah, one observation to make here is that the term that we bring into English as friendship, when we think about, friendships, philia in the Greek, actually has a wider scope than the things that you and I would call as sort of one-to-one friendships, intimate friendships or something like that. So that actually everyone with whom you share societal bonds is going to count for Aristotle as sharing in a kind of philia, in this kind of, we could call it a civic friendship, right? And so in that sense, Aristotle thinks a human life isn't possible without some kind of friendship, without some kind of sociality or interpersonal connectedness. And so naturally, what does that imply for the philosophical life? Well, Aristotle, like Socrates, is going to think of that as something that you pursue in conversation, which then, to carry it to your question about the ascetic life, I think, reminds us that, not to speak out of my depth, but that the spiritual life is something corporate, that it's something that it's a participation in a mystical body, right? The mystical body of Christ. It's not something that's pursued in isolation, even when, maybe in particular cases, it is marked by periods of physical isolation. But I've always been struck that sort of when you look at the history of the spiritual life, that the forms of religious life or of monastic life that we see really flourish in the ancient period are these monastic, these communal lives, rather than these more isolated cases. I think the form of religious life that really takes off is this corporate form of religious life. I think that reflects on the point I made a second ago, that, a deepening of spiritual life is something that happens in the context of the mystical body. Thanks, Marta. Yeah.
I have another question from our Zoom audience, from Anne Lynn, who thanks you for the talk and asks, what would you say about failed friendships or friendships that have grown weaker over time or distance?
Yeah. Thank you so much for the question. I think it's something, we all have room to reflect on as, life takes us to different parts of the world, maybe because of college or of our careers. I think Aristotle, to start with him again, does think that shared place and shared time are so central to friendship that if those sorts of things fall away, or if common ground falls away, then the friendship might not be able to survive that. There's always ground for hope that things might turn around, or that something might happen, in some way there might be an intervention that enables people to bond again, to recover the friendship. But I think that's as far as Aristotle can go. Here again, I think Christian faith or Catholic faith provides you with more resources, right? Because we know that the bonds that connect us to each other aren't only visible, aren't only material. So there's room there to use spiritual means to try to extend or try to heal or repair human relationships, human friendships, always in the hope that that desire will be reciprocated, of course. Thank you for the question.
And another online question from Sergio Leos, who asks, given the relationship between friendship and sharing the truth for a believing Christian, are you holding back any of your friendships where you don't seek to bring your friend closer to God and Christian truth?
Thank you, Sergio. That's a great and challenging question for us all to reflect on, I think. There will always be, as Aristotle would say, the step of applying it to the particular case. So general rules always have to be applied with discernment to the particular case. But I think, as you say, for those of us who have the resources of Christian faith and Christian life, recognizing that the deepest form of friendship does include this shared vision and this supernatural life, there is always that call. And so, you know, we want to avoid the risk of kind of deliberately avoiding that sharing, maybe out of a misguided sense of caution or something like that. But real prudence is a virtue, and so there's always a step of discerning when is the right moment, what are the right terms on which to speak with someone about this, how can I best appeal to them. But the great thing about this topic of the relationship between friendship and truth is that if everything's going well, then your ordinary way of displaying human virtue and warmth and affection and real interest in your friend may already be your conversation starter. And so if all goes well, that can be the way in which you begin to communicate and share the deepest truths with your friend. Thank you. We have Helena over here, Father Zach. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. I guess my question is, like, we've been talking about friendship a lot as something that two people are really intentionally pursuing. But are there cases in which, like, we owe friendship to someone who might be in our life who, like, doesn't have a lot of friends and that, like, we might not be particularly drawn to? But is that, yeah, I guess how would you respond to that? And yeah, are there times when we owe friendship to someone, and when there's not always that mutual aspect? Of course, we might really grow to love this person, but yeah, I guess how does friendship progress when there might not be a mutual intent on both sides, or it can be a little one-sided?
Thanks so much, Helena. Yeah. Two thoughts come to mind initially. One is that I'm not sure I would call it owing a friendship to someone, but I do think that for someone with a mature character, there's a capacity to recognize, you know, when someone's in need of a friend, or when someone, you know, for whatever reason is kind of lacking that, and so that there's room there to exercise virtue in responding to that. I'd think of that maybe more as generosity or charity, rather than an exercise of justice. That's one thought. And the other thought is that even if relationships start out for reasons other than reasons of friendship, they can grow to the point where two people begin to enjoy spending time with each other for its own sake, or they enjoy doing things together just for its own sake. Because even with the material from Aristotle we were studying, with those utility friendships and pleasure friendships, I mean, you may start out seeing your barber just because you need a haircut or because you need a shave. And so you're spending time with that person not for any reason that really builds them in to what you're doing, builds them into your reasons, builds them into what you really care about. But there's room as time goes on, and if the right materials are there, for a relationship that starts without that mutual care to then upgrade or to phase into that kind of friendship. Thanks, Helena. Other questions?
Thanks, Marcus, for your talk.
Thanks, man.
So Theodore Adorno has this essay about friendship where he starts out by kind of praising friendship and talking about how friendship is about forbearance and provides like refuge, reduce secrecy, and like all these things I forgot. But then he then talks about kind of like a flip side to all these good things about friendship, or flip side in his view, where he just kind of observes that in his life there are all these people that hate each other, that in a way that kind of wouldn't seem to have been possible had they not been very good friends before. And I guess I've also kind of like seen examples of this in my own life, where I guess it's usually people who were like dating each other or something, but not always. And so, yeah, I was wondering if kind of the risks associated with friendship, or if there was kind of any understanding of that in the sources that you drew on, since, yeah, I guess it's kind of like non-intuitive, but I also kind of observed in my own life too, and so.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Ben. I think that's the second or third time I've heard you make an Adorno reference recently, but I don't know what you've been reading recently. Yeah. No, thank you for the question. Yeah, so this idea that sort of if a friendship spoils, then there's actually more room there for hatred or for for contempt or something like that. maybe it seems counterintuitive to you at first, but it brings to mind to me, again, one of these great classical principles, corruptio optimi pessima, so the corruption of the best is the worst. I think what we're seeing is an application of that idea that the better something is, the worse things can go if it spoils or if it goes wrong. So in the same way, someone with a lot of potential for a really great career, someone who's really resourceful or capable, if their moral formation gets off track, then they actually have a lot more room, a lot more potential for harm than someone who had less potential, let's say, something like that idea. In this case, too, maybe the more intimate the friendship or the more room there was for real growth and virtue together, if things go wrong, then precisely the goods that were formerly shared can cause the people to sour on each other because of the investment, because of the emotional investment, because of the shared history, the shared time. Which then reminds us, to really to be intentional and to care for those who are entrusted to us when we enter into those friendships. Thanks, Ben. Any questions over here?
Hi, Dr. Gibson. Thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
So, does a friendship have to be between two people of complete? Do two people have to be complete equals to be friends? What do the thinkers that you cited, what do they think of that?
Yeah, thank you so much. Good. So, in Aristotle's case, for example, because he has quite a bit to say about this, some measure of quality is necessary to have at least some kind of friendship. And earlier, remember, I talked about even this general kind of civic friendship, kind of trust and regard that we have with each other just because we live in society together. So some level of equality, some rough correspondence is required to have some kind of friendship. But for him, the deepest kind of friendship requires a kind of complete equality or full equality, which goes hand in hand with his idea that the deepest friends will be like each other in terms of their character. So really excellent people will be fit to be friends with each other, whereas he thinks that a really excellent person couldn't truly be a friend with someone who's got a really rotten state of character, for instance. That's, I think, not a bad way of thinking about it if we're sticking with the resources from Aristotle. If we look at the Christian tradition, then we find, in a way, this idea is carried over, but it's put to very beautiful effect. So I'm thinking about the way that Aquinas, for instance, who reads Aristotle on this stuff, of course, applies that idea to the idea that what charity is, the theological virtue, is this kind of gift of friendship with God, to love with God's own love, both God himself and our fellow human beings. And there, Aquinas says, in a way, Aristotle, you're right, some kind of equality is required, but that simply brings into stark relief what a radical gift is given in charity and in the theological virtues, where we're able to share in the form of a gift in this kind of relationship of real friendship with God in Jesus. And he cites the verse from the Gospel of John where Jesus tells the apostles, "You're no longer servants, I call you friends." So yeah, excellent question. Yeah. Great. Oh, Chan, yeah.
Hi, Professor Gibson. Thanks for your talk.
Hey, Chan.
I don't have a fully formed question, but my thought goes to Augustine in his Confessions, where, with his friends, he says, he wouldn't have stole those pears if it weren't for, the companionship of his friends and their conversations and such. And so I was wondering if you could sort of comment on that and how that relates to what you said about the friendship thus far. Would this comment on Augustine's character then, about how he attracted other people of rotten characters, of rotten virtues, or would it be something else?
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much, Chan. I think kind of like with Ben's question earlier, we're talking about kind of the dark side of the potential for friendship, how sometimes it's the desire for friendship or companionship that can push us in that direction or can tempt us in the direction of getting off the right path. I think that's an element here of what Augustine's talking about in the scene you're referring to, that ordinary peer pressure and the desire for friendship and the fear of losing friendship can sometimes tempt us to head in the wrong direction. And then also the idea that our friends continually rub off on each other. This idea of mutual shaping that we also saw in Aristotle cuts both ways. And so that maybe is another lesson to bring to our reflections on friendship, is the knowledge that when you enter into a friendship with someone, you're kind of putting your character in their hands in a way, because even if you're thinking about it with clear eyes in the moment that you begin a relationship, as time goes on, you're going to find yourself changed in ways that you couldn't predict or that you wouldn't be able to really notice in the moment. So maybe that's the lesson to draw there from the theft of the pairs that you referred to. Thank you, Chen. Yeah. Great. Any further questions? Well, in that case, then, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us tonight, both in person and via Zoom. It's been such a pleasure to share these meditations, this reflection with you tonight on friendship and truth, and to everyone signing off tonight at home and looking ahead to the holidays, and to all of you students, I wish you to be able to share the very best of friendship moving forward into the winter break. Thanks so much.